Hello friends, a very warm welcome to this session with the new module that is conflict behavior. Today I am going to discuss about this module, that how we as a member of the group tend to experience different kind of conflicts, not between the groups but also within the members, because every member have a different value belief system and they are reluctant, they are inhibited to adopt or follow or believe the other opinions, values and ideas. In order to overcome these kind of conflicts, whenever groups are formed, different kind of behavioral patterns can be experienced and they are being observed, and how members including leaders along with the support of the leaders tend to resolve conflicts, and how conflicts are being experienced, they are being observed in different forms and the reasons. Before getting more into the detail about this topic, we have to start with the root level discussion while discussing about that what is conflict. Broadly be defined as the breakdown in the standard mechanism of decision making. Why breakdown in the standard mechanism of decision making? Because every member have their own value system, they have their own belief system, and they find it difficult to adapt and accept the other person's values. So, there is always a conflict or disagreement with the other member of the group, and they have their own desires and wishes, such as to have more resources to enhance their performances, to upgrade their skills, to have more power, to have more autonomy and freedom in performing their job. So, every member has different requirements, they have their different desires and wishes, and how people tend to strive those conflicts. But yes, conflict is something which is ubiquitous in nature, that is, it is present everywhere, it is inevitable in nature. No matter how organization is successful or not successful, what is the size of the organization, conflict will definitely exist, be it a very small group or it is a large group, but definitely conflict will exist everywhere. And there is never ending struggle for values that are very much dear to an individual, such as power, autonomy or rewards. There is no member in the group who has no desire for any power, autonomy or reward. Everybody desires that I should have more power in decision making, I should have more freedom to perform my job in my own way, and everybody have a desire to be recognized for his performance. So, group conflict is something which is inevitable, it is ubiquitous, and they can be experienced at two levels, that is, or there are two types of conflict, that is intergroup and intragroup conflict. So, intergroup conflict, if we talk about, it is about two distinct groups, that is two different groups who are at odds with each other. There is big difference in their opinions, ideas and belief system. They have their own desires and they cannot match with the competing group. This leads to, this aggravates to intergroup conflict, which sometimes not resolved can take a very severe form. Whereas intragroup conflict is the one where select individuals, where some individuals as part of the group clash with one another. Now, what are those clashes? Those clashes can be because of scarcity of resources, for autonomies or power, for any leadership role or position or even reward. So, this is about how conflict exists between groups and within groups. If it is between group, it is intergroup conflict. If it is within group, it is intragroup conflict. So, therefore, no matter whether it is intergroup or intragroup, if it is not resolved, if it spirals, then it can take a form of severity. Severity, that means the consequences can be very dire in nature. Maybe the members do not accept each other and they do not cooperate, and the organization fails to achieve the goal and yes, ceases to exist sometimes. So, leadership is also very important in order to resolve conflict. But here in this session, in this discussion, we are going to talk about that how conflict can be experienced in different form. It has different shades. Sometimes it is hidden, sometimes it is manifested, it is existing and everybody is going through or experiencing that conflict. Sometimes it is about resolution and how conflict can be resolved in different forms, that is through different strategies. So, this is an intensive discussion as a property of the group, we can say. So, what are the factors which are responsible for conflict in any group? Why conflict evolves in any group? Any organization can never be free of conflict. There has to be certain reason that why a conflict has taken place in any organization. So, there are certain regular factors that contribute to the evolution of conflict in any organization. So, first is antecedent factors, some factors, situations that already exist and it leads to conflict. What are those factors? Such as scarcity of resources, competition for valued material, or policy differences among individuals. Now, this is something that if the organization top management tend to impose any policy within the group itself, maybe managers would not accept, they would resist that policy, and it leads to conflict between the employees and the top management. Or it can be about scarcity of resources, that the organization do not have enough resources, and maybe it can lead to conflict because the performances goes down. The performance of the employees will be hampered, it will be impeded, and ultimately it becomes constrained. So, this leads to conflict between the employee and the organization because of the scarcity of the resources or valued material resources. Some resources are so important and valuable that everybody would want to have it, but it is not enough that everybody can be availed those resources. So, this also leads to competition or conflict for those valued materials. The other is affective factors. It is about, as the term implies, it is about emotions, that how emotions when comes to fore for any employee, then what it leads to. So, any conflicting situation can lead to anxiety, it can lead to stress, it can lead to tension, and sometimes it leads to loss of self respect. So, two employees within the group, they have a conflict, maybe they become verbally attacking each other, and ultimately the members tend to lose their self respect at workplaces. So, this leads to conflict, that is affective factors, which actually leads to, it hits the emotions of the employees. Maybe one employee was not appropriately rewarded for his performance, so he is emotionally hurt. So, this leads to conflict with the organization. So, factors such as rewards in terms of respect and esteem, stress, tension, hostility and anxiety. The other is cognitive factors such as perception and understanding of the conflicting situation. So, maybe some members of the group are in conflict with each other, but if that conflict is experienced, then how and to what extent that conflicting situation can be handled properly by other members and the leader itself. If they fail to do so, then this leads to perception of conflict that is lingering, that becomes ubiquitous, inevitable, and it becomes unresolved. Then it leads to another negative situation. So, we can say that conflict is a process that begins with one party who perceives that another party has negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something that the first party cares about. It is about tussle between two employees or two groups, that how the other member is going to negatively affect us in order to protect the group itself. This leads to conflict. So, definitely when conflict is there, it has some adverse effects and also how it has to be resolved. Alright, views on conflict. So, till now OB professionals have identified two views on conflict. One is a traditional view of conflict and the other is interactionist view of conflict. Till now, whatever we have discussed in terms of definition and factors leading to conflict, definitely we have this kind of impression that conflict is a negative situation, definitely. But recently it has been identified that since conflict is an inevitable aspect of any work life or organization, then it has some positive aspects as well. Since we are only talking about the negative impact or adverse effects of conflict, we tend to ignore the positive aspects of conflict. So, according to traditional view of conflict, it is viewed negatively and discussed in terms of violence, destruction and irrationality to reinforce its negative connotation. So, traditional view has a very negative connotation, that it is always perceived in terms of violence, destruction and irrationality. But yes, the interactionist view have perceived conflict in a positive state, where that any conflict has a positive force as well, because it leads a group to perform effectively in order to resolve conflict and perform to the optimum level. So, this is another, because whenever group experience any conflict, so members come all together in order to resolve that conflict and the group should function effectively. In the traditional view, we have never talked about that how members tend to come together in order to resolve the conflict. We only talked about the negative impact of conflict, or we have perceived this term negatively, but the interactionist view has talked about that every conflict has some kind of positive force that tends to resolve conflict in a positive manner, and the group tends to grow more after resolving that conflict. So, there is a kind of growth after conflict as well. So, this is about the traditional and the interactionist view on conflict. Alright. Next is stages of conflict. It is not that any conflict has just taken place and members tend to engage in decision making in order to resolve conflict. There is a gradual process that a conflict can take place. So, OB professionals have identified 4 stages of conflict. The first is latent conflict, which is very much hidden, not very much clear, but still exists. The second is felt or personalized conflict. It is about whenever a conflict is felt, that how employees' emotions are being dismantled and they tend to make efforts in order to keep themselves emotionally stable. The other is manifest conflict, which is very much apparent that two groups or maybe two individuals of the group are in conflict situation and they are becoming verbally aggressive at the same time. So, it is manifest, it is observed in a very physical or objective manner. And the last is aftermath conflict, the consequence of the conflict, and still people have tendency to either to exaggerate the conflict or resolve the conflict. So, we can deal and discuss the stages of conflict in detail in the next slide. Alright, the latent conflict. The potential for conflict exists whenever people have different needs, desires, values and interest. So, competition for scarce resources, drive for autonomy and power, goal divergence, perceived conflict, role conflict form the basis of conflict. For example, role conflict or ambiguity, when members are not clear about what they have to do, what job they have to perform, this leads to conflict with the administration, with the system, with the top management. So, this is something latent conflict which is insidious in nature. People have some kind of feeling that they are not in parity with the system and there is a conflict with the system and within the person itself. Person knows that there is scarcity of resources, the person has a desire to have more power, more autonomy to perform the job, and ultimately the person feels that conflict, but very much insidious. So, this is latent conflict. So, latent conflict may not become apparent until a triggering event leads to the emergence of the obvious conflict. So, it is insidious until unless any situation, any person will trigger that person and that conflict will come out. Then only that conflict can be manifested, that is, it is observed in a very objective manner. So, emergence may be followed quickly by settlement of the conflict, that is resolution is there, or it can be escalated which can become more destructive. So, if that triggering event continues, then definitely that the hidden conflict will evolve outside, it becomes apparent in nature, and if immediately it is resolved, so there can be settlement or resolution of the conflict, and if the organization fails to resolve that conflict, then it has more negative consequences or destructive consequences, because that conflict will become more severe. So, this is latent conflict. It can only become manifested, it can only be observed once any triggering event will take place and there is emergence of that conflict. The other is felt or personalized conflict. The felt stage of conflict concentrates on emotions coming into play for the affective parties. So, if two parties or two individuals are in conflict with each other, they are emotionally triggered. Their self-esteem is hurt, their self-respect has been hurt, they are full of anxiety, they are full of tension, they are full of aggression. Aggression is also an emotion. So, in other words, when two people are aware that they have a conflict in the workplace, it contributes to the feeling of tension, stress and anxiety. Even when we are not interacting with the conflicting person, in the back of the mind that conflict is on. This leads to tension, anxiety and stress. So, this is felt or personalized conflict, which is very much related to an individual's emotional aspect at workplace. Alright, this is the third, that is manifest conflict, when two parties engage in behaviors that evoke responses from each other. So, till now the conflict was felt and it was latent. You were feeling and it was not coming out until unless a triggering event will take place to evolve with that conflict. But yes, if two people engage in verbal aggression or verbal attacks, then it can be said that the conflict has been manifested and people tend to respond each other in a very negative pattern such as aggression, apathy, sabotage or withdrawal. Apathy, showing least interest in interacting with the person with whom we are conflicting. Sabotage, for example, tarnishing the image of the co-worker with whom we are in conflict, or we are in the withdrawal mode. That means, we are not accepting that conflict and how to resolve it. So, definitely it tends to continue. So, this is the manifest conflict, which is objective in nature, and objectively we can realize that two people are in conflict with each other. Last stage is conflict aftermath. The conflict aftermath may have positive or negative repercussions for the organizations depending upon how the conflict is resolved. If the conflict is genuinely resolved to the satisfaction of all participants, the base for a more cooperative relationship may be laid. So, this becomes the utmost responsibility of the organization to resolve the conflict. The latent conflict stage has passed, the felt conflict stage has been passed, the manifested conflict has also surpassed. Now, after the conflict is experienced, or two people have gone through that conflict in a very objective manner, in reality, in realistic manner, then members have to face the consequences of the conflict. Now, since it is not coming to an end, so the organization has to intervene. It becomes the responsibility of the organization to intervene to resolve the conflict. At that particular moment, if the organization can resolve in a very genuine manner, then there can be some kind of parity between two conflicting groups or members, and there can be establishment of cooperative relationship. On the other hand, if the conflict is merely suppressed but not resolved, then it may be aggravated and explode in a more serious form until they are rectified. So, the point is that if it is not resolved even at that fourth stage, then again it will come out in a more severe manner. That is the conflict aftermath. So, if it explodes in a more serious form until they are rectified, so this conflict episode is called conflict aftermath. If it is not resolved, it is suppressed, then whenever in the next instance it is triggered and comes out, it becomes manifested, then it comes out in a more severe manner, and that situation is termed as conflict aftermath, because it was not resolved, it was actually suppressed, not resolved. So, this is how the stage of conflict can be defined in terms of latent conflict, felt or perceived conflict, manifest conflict, and aftermath conflict. Okay. Next is sources of conflict. What are the sources of conflict? There are certain reasons that conflict has taken place because of some reasons within the organization. So, OB professionals have identified three sources of conflict. The first is process of dysfunctional conflict, personal or affective conflict, and task or substantive or functional conflict. Process conflict, this refers to disagreement over the methods or procedures of the group should use in order to complete the task. So, it is about strategic planning, that how the task has to be performed, but if the members do not agree, then it leads to dysfunctional or process conflict. So, it occurs when strategies, policies and procedures are at clash. That is what? That any common goal that has been identified and it has to be achieved based on performing certain task, based on some strategy, if members do not agree, then it leads to process or dysfunctional conflict. And what are the consequences of such kind of conflict? So, this creates a climate of suspicion and distrust. So, this kind of conflict will only take place when members do not trust each other, and any member can think of another member that he is following this strategy because of satisfying his own personal interest. So, there is a climate of suspicion or distrust among members. It leads to increased turnover intention. When people do not resolve such kind of conflict, then people develop an intention to leave that organization or leave that professional group. It leads to ambiguity, definitely. When people disagree with each other in order to achieve the common task based on certain procedures, practices, policies and methods, then it leads to some kind of confusion and ambiguity, and people lose interest in their job and again tend to leave the job immediately. And most importantly, which is the most aversive and negative consequence of this kind of conflict, is that people engage in negative patterns of behaviors ranging from insurrection, that is open revolt, to schism. These are psychological terms when we talk about conflict. Insurrection, that is open revolt, to schism, that is discord, disunion or a formal breach, that people tend to breach the group. They will leave the group in between of the process, and ultimately the group tends to suffer a lot, because the ultimate consequence is that it ceases to exist and the group goal cannot be achieved. So, it spurs negative patterns of behavior ranging from insurrection to scheme. This is one of the sources of conflict in organizations. The other is task, substantive or functional conflict. This conflict arises when intra-group members disagree on issues that are relevant to meeting shared goals. Effective groups and organizations make use of these conflicts to make plans, foster creativity, solve problems and resolve misunderstandings. So, task conflict arises when intra-group members disagree on issues that are relevant to meeting shared goals. This is about when members to a certain extent tend to disagree with the other members of the group. But it is not that the group conflict will become severe in nature or it leads to revolt or open revolt or schism, insurrection or schism, but it is considered in a positive manner that when such kind of conflict is experienced within group, then how people tend to resolve such kind of conflict based on perceiving that conflict as a positive force. So, this kind of conflict provides an opportunity to release tension because members tend to share what they feel based on the disagreement. So, they find a way out to vent their conflict or stress or tension or anxiety among members. It compels an individual towards the right decision making because every member is cohesive in nature at the base level. So, they do not want to leave the group and tend to engage in positive decision making or right decision making in order to keep the group functional, even if task conflict exists in that group. It encourages innovation or creativity through problem solving. So, whenever member disagree, they will not extend the conflict, they will try to resolve the conflict while giving more importance to other members' ideas based on innovation and creativity. So, they are more eager to resolve problems, engaging in different positive patterns of behavior. It makes the group more cohesive because the group has a high status, members do not want to leave the organization. So, they become more cohesive and find positive ways out to resolve the conflict. And last, it helps in identifying the weaknesses of the group. So, there can be certain reasons that why the task cannot be performed based on certain factors. So, members try to find out the root cause level of the conflict while identifying all the resources, by identifying or collecting all the important information and then clearing the doubts in order to resolve any conflict. So, when we talk about task, substantive or functional conflict, then actually it leads to, it is a positive force that leads to enhancements in the patterns of behavior at workplace of the employees. And the last is personal or affective conflict. It is also known as personality conflict, emotional conflict or relationship conflicts. It is about interpersonal relationships that exist among members and how people tend to come to an odd and how they resolve. So, these conflicts occur when group members dislike one another. For example, one person evaluates another or his or work negatively and is one common cause of personal conflict. So, this kind of conflict threatens an individual's emotional well-being. So, this kind of personal conflict is based on interpersonal relationship that maybe one member of the group would criticize the other member's performance and it hampers an individual's performance, at the same time emotional and mental well-being. So, these are the three sources of conflict at workplaces: process or dysfunctional conflict, task or functional conflict, or personal or affective conflict. All right. So, what are the positive aspects of conflict? Conflict is integral to the process of change. So, there are certain positive functions of conflict. So, it provides an opportunity for releasing tension which otherwise would remain suppressed. Conflict fosters problem solving by adopting a course of action. So, people tend to come up with more ideas, more creativity in order to resolve the conflict and continue the membership. The thinking process followed by the conflict may lead to innovations in policies and procedures and changes in behaviors. That means, they tend to revise, reinvent policies and procedures and make it according to the wishes and desires of the employees. So, this is the role and responsibility of the management to engage in resolving conflicts in order to revise policies and procedures that offer in a way that suits best to the employees. Conflict makes the group more cohesive as every member cooperates to meet the pressure of the conflicting situation, and it helps in identifying the weaknesses in the system. So, whenever conflict arises, it is not only about the members sometimes the system is also weak at some or the other point, and how those loopholes can be tightened in order to make the system or mechanism within the group more effective. So, this is the positive aspect of a conflict. It is a test of the capacities of individuals and groups, that is, members tend to push their boundaries to an extent in order to maintain cordial or climate within the group, maintain trust within the group, and ultimately enhance their skills in order to maintain the effectiveness of the group performance. It provides challenges to the group members, and the members feel highly satisfied and motivated. It is appearance of differences and is also a reflection of the presence of diversity in human interaction. So, this is the positive aspect, that we always talk about difference in opinion. Why not we perceive these differences as presence of diversity in human interaction, that people have different thoughts, ideas, and how every diverse thought and idea can be collaborated in order to have a bigger and positive picture for the group. This is the positive aspect of the conflict. Most importantly, it is a source of socially functionally forces and can secure social commitments, no matter whether the group is personal or professional group, but ultimately there it offers a broader stage for establishing interpersonal relationships which satisfies sense of belongingness and gives an individual emotional security, which prepares an individual to be socially functional. That means the person's social and emotional well-being is more fostered in terms of conflict. And the last is the negative aspects of a conflict. It may create a climate of suspicion and distrust. When people differ, then definitely there is a sense of distrust among members, that is why they differ. So, this is the negative aspect of conflict. It may lead to the propensity with the intention to leave organization. It becomes difficult for the members to resolve conflict, and they find difficulty in survival, and ultimately they have intention to leave the organization. It may threaten their emotional well-being. Definitely, when effective sources are not satisfied, the person experiences loss of emotions or fails in maintaining emotions at workplace, and leads to decreased emotional well-being. It may lead to role ambiguity or role conflict. When conflict arises, there is fractured interaction among members, which leads to ambiguity or conflict or confusion among members in order to realize their task to perform, and it may range from insurrection to schism, that is open revolt to aggression. So, this is about the negative aspects of a conflict. So, we are through with this discussion. We will continue in the next session. Thank you so much.